Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Norwegian Atlantic Committee's breakfast seminar. Today we are joined by the by the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, to collaborate on this seminar about the Romanian elections that took place last year. And we are very happy to be joined by the former Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mihai-Răzvan Ungureanu. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that.
Perfect.
Very good. And Mr. Arild Moe, research professor at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute. He will moderate this discussion, and I will leave it to you to further introduce our guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Nice to see so many people up in this morning session. Welcome, everybody. Yes, this topic for today, unfortunately, is very timely, because not only did we have elections last year in Romania, we'll have, this year also, as you probably know. But the topic has wider ramifications than Romania. Voter interference in elections, manipulations of results. That is an issue that is now a common concern in Europe. So Romania is important in itself because it's an ally. It has a very important location. But it's also an example of what could happen other places. As Camilla said, and as you know from the invitation, our speaker today has a quite distinguished background in political life. But we know him at the Nansen Institute as a professor of history and as the founder of the Center for Russian Studies at the University of Bucharest. We've had a cooperation for the last couple of years, which has been extremely interesting for us, getting insights into the perspectives of that part of Europe. And the center has been able to organize 3 very successful conferences with wide European participation, but also building a network of researchers and specialists in Southeastern Europe. Better sound. Okay. Anyway, without much further ado, I'll leave the floor to Professor Ungureanu, and we will have some time for questions and discussions after his speech. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your gracious invitation at the Norwegian Atlantic Committee. Thank you, the hosts and your colleagues. I also it's my duty to thank the very distinguished Norwegian colleagues from the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, represented here by Professor Arild Moe. We indeed, he said, cooperated for quite a number of years now, under the aegis of various financial schemes, either supported by the European Union or by the bilateral Romanian-Norwegian Fund. And I would say that the results of our cooperation went outstanding, and we hope to enlarge them in the years to come. It brought forth a lot of publications, either minor, smaller, but important, academically speaking, projects, enlarging at the same time the cooperation in this very sensitive field of academic interest, namely the strategic importance of the northern area of our continent and the Black Sea region in the eastern confines of Europe. And certainly all these projects are related to the situation in Ukraine and to Russia's strategic or military interests in Europe. I have to say with a very bitter smile, if it is a smile, I think it's a rictus on my face, that when in the last days of February 2022, Putin's Russia invaded Ukraine, that gave us quite a lot of fresh air into our cooperation. Otherwise, it would have been very barren academically speaking. And now we know we have a focus, and we have dealt with this focus for quite a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's always difficult to get your attention as this early time in the morning. As it usually happens, I have there are two ways opening in front of me, either boring you to death, and I would assume this. I mean, it's absolutely legal to have a nap at 9 o'clock in the morning, a beauty nap, or to gather your interest, which I truly hope. This few words of mine, and this is an understatement, there's quite a lot of words, unfortunately. These words of mine are not meant for our friends, our Romanian friends in the audience, because they know everything. They know better than myself what happened in Romania in the past months, 10 to 12. And as it usually happens, when subjects of this sensitivity arise to the very attention of the local public, everyone is entitled to have its own opinion. And you will see by the end of my speech that every Romanian has an opinion about this. And it's in a way, it gets on uncontradictorily. So my job is to moderate them as well as this discussion. So I try to find a title, which is not usually the best, and here I am. The second round that wasn't. This is the title of my lecture. Why the Romanian Constitutional Court annulled the presidential elections. There are some minute details I have to go through, but I hope you will get some patience when going over them. On December 6th last year, the final day of Romania's most turbulent presidential election campaign in the last 25 years, have to say it into parentheses, that 2024 was the first time in the modern history of Romania when 4 rounds of elections happened. It was the same year, yeah? Local elections, Europarliamentarian elections, general elections, and finally presidential elections. What stirred up the problems that we will be now ready to discuss upon were the presidential elections. So by the end of this very weary year of political campaign and wrangling, the Constitutional Court, on 6 December, issued a ruling that was unprecedented not only in recent Romanian but also in European constitutional history. It annulled the first round of the elections held on 24th of November and ordered the entire electoral process to restart. Only 4 days earlier, on 2nd December 2024, the same court had ruled not to annul the first round of the elections. What led to this dramatic shift between those two dates? The decision is extreme and deeply concerning in a democratic state governed by the rule of law, and it is hard to comprehend under normal circumstances. To understand and evaluate this decision, one must consider the broader context of the presidential elections and the previous interventions of the Constitutional Court regarding the electoral procedure. Seen in this light, circumstances under which this decision was made appear anything but normal. You'll see how many points of occurrence would there be between what the Constitutional Court in Romania did and what the Constitutional Court in Norway, the Kingdom of Norway, could do. The context. In Romania, the president is elected directly by the people in 2 rounds. The second round takes place if no candidate secures a majority of valid votes in the first round, as usual, with the top 2 candidates proceeding to the second. 2 government institutions are responsible for organizing the presidential elections: the temporary Central Electoral Bureau and the Permanent Electoral Authority, each with distinct powers in the electoral process. The first, plays a central role, including registering candidates, whereas the permanent electoral authority, the latter, is mainly tasked with administrative duties such as organizing polling stations, printing ballots, etc. The first significant controversy in this electoral cycle was the candidacy of a certain lady called Diana Șoșoacă, a nationalist extremist who came out of the blue, which was, the candidacy was annulled by the Constitutional Court in early October. The court based its ruling on the candidate's behavior and statements, which it deemed anti-constitutional, against Romania's membership in NATO and the European Union, and contrary to the liberal democratic principles enshrined in the Constitution. This ruling was controversial, with parts of the legal community, civil society and political circles arguing that the court overstepped its bounds because it was a decision based on ethical reasons. Ethical reasons are not completely inscribed or described in a constitutional text. The court's organic law only permits the removal of a candidate from the race on legal grounds, such as a failure to meet the formal requirements to candidate. A dissenting opinion from a constitutional judge noted that, quote, no constitutional legal provision allows the Constitutional Court, by interpreting its own power at its turn, expressly limited by the Constitution and the law, to extend and supplement with two new conditions for the candidates of an obviously subjective nature, as they regard aspects of a person's behavior, opinions, and statements, unquote. Nevertheless, it was this innovative interpretation that ultimately enabled the court to annul the entire electoral process on December 6th. After this bumpy start, the electoral campaign proceeded in a seemingly ordinary way. The first round of elections took place on 24th of November. Exit polls at the close of the voting revealed a fairly predictable result. The Social Democrat candidate, chairman of the Social Democrat Party and prime minister at the same time, Mr. Marcel Ciolacu, in first place, followed by a center-right candidate, Elena Lasconi, and the far-right candidate, George Simion, and others. However, by the morning of November 25th, follow me in this particular line of dates, the order dramatically changed, that is, in 24 hours. With a virtually unknown, quote-unquote, independent candidate called Călin Georgescu, claiming first place, then followed by the lady called Elena Lasconi, I just quoted. The shock came from the fact that Georgescu had been given negligible scores in polls throughout the campaign, had not participated in any televised debates except one, and had been largely invisible in the mainstream media. He came out as a hologram, out of the blue. Nevertheless, he had been heavily promoted on TikTok. For those of you who are not familiar with this is a social platform please ask your children about. Receiving millions of views in the final days of the campaign. His statements on TikTok and on other, TikTok is run by the Chinese, by the way, with some Russian friends. And on other rather obscure platforms, which were pro-Putin, anti-NATO, and anti-EU, along with his praise for extremist movements from World War II, such as the infamous Iron Guard in Romania in the interwar period, and the fascist dictator Antonescu, raised suspicions of foreign interference in his candidacy and the unexpectedly high number of votes he received. Against this backdrop of a suspected hybrid attack on democracy in Romania by a foreign power, the Constitutional Court was asked to rule on a request to annul the first round, alleging vote fraud in favor of the latter candidate Lasconi, the lady. On November 29th, so that is 3 days after, 2 days before the parliamentary elections, due December 1st, the court postponed its decision for Monday 2 December and ordered a recount of all votes cast in the first round. Following a partial not a total, a partial recount, the court ruled on December 2nd to validate the first round of the election. Meanwhile, the Supreme Council for Defense of the country met on 29th November to discuss possible foreign interference in the election process and its potential threat to national security. The findings were not made public. Footnote. The Supreme Council for Defense of the country is chaired by the President of Romania, co-chaired by the Prime Minister, is comprised by the Minister of Defense, Minister of Interior, Minister of Finance, the heads of the Internal Security Service and Foreign Intelligence Service, and other ministries which are sometimes permanent guests. Its decisions are not, they do not have the power of a law. They're not executive. They're merely recommendations, and they cannot be taken but by consensus. But it's an important body which is asked to perform duties when matters, delicate matters like national security, comes at fore. After the court's ruling of 2nd December, the authority, the Permanent Electoral Authority, began preparing for the second round of the presidential elections, scheduled for December 8th. On December 4th, the President of Romania declassified the intelligence presented to this Supreme Council for Defense of the country the week before, in that meeting of November 29th, which revealed illegal interferences with the election process in favor of this candidate, Georgescu, who came out of the blue, as I said, including manipulation on the TikTok social platform, suspicious financial transactions, and, quote unquote, interference of a foreign state actor, unquote. For those of you who are familiar with Harry Potter, yeah, you know that Lord Voldemort, who's actually the devil himself, is never been quoted by name. Is always referred to as the one who has not a name to be pronounced. So when I say in interference of a foreign state actor, I leave this to your imagination interpretation. The General Prosecutor's Office opened an investigation into these illegal electoral interferences, and the following day, numerous complaints were submitted to the Constitutional Court requesting the annulment of the first round. In the evening of December 5th, so one day after the other, the court announced that since the deadline for the first round has passed, the complaints would not be examined until after the second round. That second round, which was scheduled for December 8th. All these constitutional developments occurred against a backdrop of economic concern and street protests in support of liberal democracy and Romania's European way. Pro-European, pro-NATO parties and organizations expressed their support for the counter-candidate of Mr. Georgescu, namely Mrs. Lasconi. And then, in an unprecedented move, the court convened on December 6th and decided to annul the entire electoral process. It is important to note from the outset that the existing legislation in Romania contains significant gaps, either lacking express provisions on certain procedures or by being imprecise. Therefore, the court's interpretative work was particularly necessary in this case. 2nd December, Constitutional Court's ruling number 31 validated the first round, so I retake the process to make it clearer to you. Validated the first round based on the recount of votes and Article 52 of the law on the election of the president, which stipulates that the Constitutional Court may annul an election if fraud has affected the attribution of mandates or the ranking of the candidates for the second round. After the recount, so we are on December 2nd, yeah? The court found no evidence of fraud. though the law does not define the concept of fraud. However, despite the Supreme Council's early meeting and the availability of some public information on the findings, the court did not request classified information from the Security Council that might have been relevant to its ruling, relying only on the recount. In 4 days' time, December 6, the Constitutional Court issues ruling number 32, which was a direct consequence of the declassification of information that was made by the President in between the 2nd and the 6th December. The court did not address any of the complaints filed after the declassification, but declared its authority to act under its general power to, quote, ensure compliance with the procedure for electing the President of Romania and confirm the results of the vote, unquote, and as, quote, guarantor of the supremacy of the Constitution, unquote. These are articles in the Constitution. After considering the declassified information, the court concluded that there was sufficient evidence to annul the entire election process, which it found to have been tainted by the actions of one of the candidates who advanced to the second round. These actions involved, quote, multiple irregularities and violations of the electoral legislation, which compromised the fairness of the vote and distorted the transparency and equity of the electoral campaign. The court found that these violations, including illegal social media campaign, had a cumulative effect that undermined the essential principles of democratic elections. Consequently, the court annulled the election and ordered the government to set a new election date. This ruling that, on its basis, annulled the first round of presidential elections, never mentioned a foreign actor or the interference of a foreign power whatsoever. Because that candidate that came out of the blue was so daring that he, in several circumstances during his campaign, said that he will not take into account during his campaign of the provisions of the law addressing the legality of elections themselves. And he did against the law. He did a lot of things against the law, affirming them publicly or announcing publicly that he is entitled to do them because he doesn't want to respect the law. And it was on this very case that the court elaborated its answer that then gave way to the annulment of the elections. Are there consequences? There's score: constitutional, political, and potentially economic and geopolitical. From a constitutional perspective, the electoral process restarts, new elections are called, candidacies are likely to be subject to stricter scrutiny than before, considering these developments. And as it has been expected, other candidacies may be rejected by the Central Electoral Bureau or annulled by the Constitutional Court on grounds beyond mere legal compliance at the moments of registration. And I jump into these very days. A new electoral process has been organized by the government. Mr. Georgescu, this candidate coming out of nowhere, has been banned from his candidature. The court, the Constitutional Court, and prior to the Constitutional Court, the Central Electoral Bureau took into consideration his declarations against the European Union, against NATO, he was advocating for transforming Romania into a dictatorship, he was quoted saying that the very next days I'll be in power, all parties will be gone. And he is also linked to all sorts of paramilitary extreme right groups who, in their own milieus, were praising, organizing a coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat in Romania, which was quite a surprise, very much. Romanians are not accustomed to coup d'etat, except December 1989. What happened next is that this candidate again, who's a sort of an aesthetic abhorrence, this candidate is not only quoted for his anti-democratic, anti-EU, anti-NATO declarations. He's also quoted for all sorts of things which cannot rank into what we'd call a sane definition of social behavior. For example, he is absolutely persuaded there will be no man on the moon in 1969, that the world is governed by central conspiracy, guess by whom is this conspiracy made of, that water carries information, that we should not drink bubbled water, that is carbohydrate water, because it contains all sorts of nanosips, and this would condition us to the very will of a central global government, which is an expression of Judeo-Masonry. So this is the guy. And he also argues for banning the cesarean surgery, because through a cesarean surgery, the divine link, quote unquote, between the newborn baby and his mother and God himself will be cut off. Now, please try and make a bit of a rational out of this. But he succeeded in this very mishmash of new age and esoteric and mystical blah blahs. He succeeded to represent himself at the same time as a sort of newly born Messiah at the time of a complete lack of trust traditional parties have had and have. Secondly, the Constitutional Court held that the current president's term, who was supposed to end by December 21st, will be extended beyond the usual 5 years period until the newly elected president takes the oath of office. Again, something that we have never met before. This extension is not explicitly provided for in the Constitution, which states that the presidential term may only be extended by law, quote, in case of war or catastrophe, unquote. The ruling, however, is based on another provision of the Constitution, which is contradictory, which states that the office of the president lasts until the newly elected president takes the oath. And this provision applies to normal circumstances, referring to elections that take place before the end of the president's term and not after. The court's interpretation is preferable to the extended application of the rule regarding the interim office, which states that, quote, in case of vacancy in the office of president, or if the president is suspended from office or is temporarily incapable to exercise his powers, the interim shall devolve in this order, or the president of the Senate, or the president of the Chamber of Deputies. Politically, reactions have been mixed, ranging from criticism of the ruling as illegal and illegitimate to praising it as the only correct solution after the declassification of the documents discussed in the later meeting of the National Security Council. The former president, Mr. Iohannis, linked the interference to foreign state involvement, while the French embassy in Bucharest commented on, quote, Russian interference that aimed at the alteration of the integrity of the elections, unquote. The US State Department, or the last days of Biden's administration, expressed confidence in Romania's democratic institutions. From an economic and geopolitical standpoint, the constitutional crisis in Romania increases regional instability. This is particularly concerning given that the far right, which is not Eurosceptic, it's anti-Euro and anti-NATO, holds now almost 30% of the seats in the Romanian parliament following the 1st December parliamentary elections. And the pro-European majority is prone to be fragile, although 60%, worth 60%. The outcome of the presidential elections is significant, not for the powers of the office which are rather limited in the Romania semi-presidential system, but for its symbolic value. A pro-European president in a country with a war raging at its borders could be a vital guarantor of both democratic order and regional stability region. Some lessons to be learned from this account of mine. This unprecedented case underscores that no liberal democracy is immune to hybrid attacks on its core electoral processes, particularly in an era dominated by social media and increasingly powerful artificial intelligence. The first lesson is the need to more effective safeguards, especially of a constitutional and legal procedural nature, which Romania lacked at the time, and most European countries, EU members, NATO members alike, lack them as well. To prevent such attacks alongside existing institutional protections, intelligence bodies, defense services, legal provision. The second lesson, which is specific to Romania, is that excessive fragmentation of the political scene against the background of that quoted lack of trust can leave liberal democratic forces more vulnerable to the rise of far-right, sovereignist and populist movements. In the case of my country, it is evident that legislative gaps, such as the lack of effective procedures to prevent foreign interference via social media, poor communication between state agencies, and delayed institutional responses contributed to the situation escalating to a point where the elections were annulled at the last moment after the voting had already commenced. Urgent legislative changes are today needed to tighten regulations of electoral campaigns, social media, and particularly platforms like TikTok that played a significant role in this major crisis. Legal safeguards have to be, from my point of view, clear, proportional, and designed to protect against abuse while meeting the standards of democratic society. There have been plenty of academics and journalists and political personalities who tried to dig into what had happened in the last days of in the last days of November, throughout the month of December, and up to this very day. In the meantime, some things unraveled under our very eyes. The Romanian Permanent Electoral Authority, for example, suffered over 85,000 cyber attacks trying to gain access to the website databases the day before and after the election day, and during the election day, and, quoting the Romanian Domestic Security Service, the responsible party was a state actor with considerable resources. Certainly, it's not the island of Nauru. There is an entity that could do these things in a general way, paying a lot of money. The TikTok officials were very soon after the first ruling of the Constitutional Court, they were summoned to Brussels to take questions from the floor in the European Parliament and from representatives of the European Commission. And at the end, on December the 3rd, the TikTok officials reported to the European Parliament that TikTok had removed 66,000 fake accounts and over 10 million fake followers from the platform, referring to supporting that shadowy candidate, Georgescu, before the first round of election. The TikTok official also stated that TikTok removed networks of hundreds of thousands of accounts in the days after the first round. And that was a moment when people started recalling that this candidate publicly claimed that he has spent no money whatsoever, not a very single dime, on his electoral campaign, which is like inventing a perpetuum mobile. It's impossible. But he expressed this, and this raised the eyebrows of all institutions around Romania, public included. The TikTok officials reported that one of these networks of accounts were targeting not just Romania itself, but the Republic of Moldova too. And the electoral processes in Moldova and in Romania were very much akin. The more, one of the public outlets that's been prohibited in Romania, not prohibited in Moldova, that was very active in promoting this avalanche of fake accounts, was the famous Russian state-owned propaganda outlet Sputnik. Romanian investigative outlet also recently reported that now, this is the name of a company, a digital advertising company, reportedly tied to the Kremlin, directed at least 2 million euros between 2016 and 2024 to far-right Romania media and influencers that promoted narratives similar to those that Mr. Georgescu featured in his campaign. And then, step by step, following not the flow of the river, but against the flow of the river, came out that Russia was likely also to target Romanian election infrastructure with thousands of cyber attacks. And I will go into some very specific conclusions after considering not me, but a lot of other organizations in Romania and abroad, after closely considering this process by which an unknown candidate just surged up, erupted on the political scene with almost no previous signs of political existence or activity whatsoever. Russian military intelligence is being held responsible for attempting to destabilize the situation in Romania, not only on the social media, but also trying to orchestrate mass protests in support of the pro-Russian presidential candidate Georgescu. Evidence implicating Russian military intelligence includes this candidate's connection with mercenaries groups, some of them akin to the former Wagner group, linked to figures associated with Russian influence, some of them conspiring together in the contracts they have concluded with various governments or anti-governmental groups in Central African countries. Neo-nationalist movements, former Foreign Legion fighters groups, they all conspire together, were together, trying to help and back the presidential candidature of Mr. Georgescu. In the end, on March the 6th, 6 individuals this year in Romania were arrested on suspicion of preparing a coup d'etat and committing treasons. They maintain contacts with agents from Russia, where they traveled several times to discuss their plans to seize power. In the end, the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided to expel 2 Russian diplomats from the country, which is something that doesn't happen every day in Bucharest. Several indicators suggest possible Russian influence in mass protests in Romania. A coordinated disinformation campaign. Researchers have identified social media operations that deploy narratives echoing known Russian propaganda tactics. These campaigns often push anti-EU, anti-NATO, and anti-Western messages, which can help mobilize protest movements under different pretexts. Second, digital footprint analysis. Studies of online activity during protests events have revealed networks of bots and coordinated accounts. The behavior and messaging patterns resemble those seen in other Russian influence operations across Eastern Europe, the Republic of Moldova, partially Ukraine, Poland, starting with September last year, and the Baltic countries. Third, intelligence assessments. Western intelligence agencies have warned that Russia uses hybrid warfare, including covert disinformation, to destabilize European nations. While details are typically classified, these assessments indicate that such tactics have been deployed in Romania as well. 4. Comparative tactics. Analysts note that the methods observed in Romania bear similarities to operations in other neighboring countries, where Russian involvement is more clearly documented, suggesting the broader regional strategy of attack. 5. Domestic concerns. Romanian officials and experts have expressed alarm over the surge of foreign-funded online propaganda, noting that such efforts appear aimed at influencing public opinion and inciting unrest. What could be Russia's interests in destabilizing Romania? What we need to understand, when we need to understand this, we have to wear strategic and geopolitical lenses. Otherwise, our sight is pretty blurred. First, undermining NATO and EU unity. Romania is a key member of both NATO and EU. Destabilizing Romania in a region which is not exactly stable can weaken the cohesion and effectiveness of these alliances, which Russia views as major counterweights to its influence in Eastern Europe. Another interest refers to hybrid warfare and influence operations. Russia has long employed hybrid warfare tactics, combining disinformation, cyber operations, and covert political interference to sow discord in neighboring countries. Destabilizing helps create internal divisions that can be then exploited to erode public trust in democratic institutions. A third category of interest: geopolitical leverage. By fostering instability in Romania, Russia aims to create a more favorable security environment in its vicinity. This could limit the ability of Western powers to project influence in the region and might pave the way for increased Russian presence or influence. A fourth category: exploiting nationalist and populist sentiments. Russian-backed disinformation campaigns often amplify existing societal divides, including nationalist and populist sentiments. This can lead to political polarization, making it harder for the government to maintain a united front against external pressures. And the fifth category of interest: destabilizing the eastern flank. A destabilized Romania could act as a pressure valve for Russian efforts to destabilize the broader Eastern European region. This would further complicate the security landscape, both for NATO and EU, reducing the deterrence effect along Russia's western border. Overall, Russia's interest in destabilizing Romania aligns with its broader strategy to weaken Western alliances, disrupt political stability of neighboring states, and enhance its own strategic maneuverability in the region. And I will end my speech with quoting something that was very much supports what I delivered you. A couple of weeks ago, alongside some other voices from the French Foreign Intelligence Service, the DGSE, the committee of the Italian intelligence bodies, and namely the Foreign Intelligence Body of the Italian Republic, issued a statement about what happened in Romania in the last part of 2024 and early 2025. 25,000 accounts, new accounts created on TikTok, all defined only to support this candidate Georgescu. And those accounts came up only 2 weeks before the presidential elections last year. Prior to these ill-fated 2 weeks, since 2016, up to those 2 weeks, there were only 797 accounts on behalf of this candidate. And they were negligible in effect. In 2 weeks only, there were less than 14 days. From roughly 800 accounts, the number of accounts surged up to 25,000. All of them extremely active, multiplying themselves on various social platforms. A Telegram canal called Propagator, what a deftly name, brought up the number of his members to 4,000 right before the elections. And to bring up the number of its members to this figure, there were about roughly $400,000 consumed for the sponsorship of this online network. Romania was subjected to cyber attacks during the electoral process, prior to the electoral process, after the electoral process, up to November 25th, in a number of 85,000. 33 countries were localized as sources of these attacks, but all of them had their upper stream in Russia, and mostly in Moscow and St. Petersburg. That was what I intended to present you. I'm sorry I have no jokes left, but I hope you paid attention to my very sincere and open speech to you. I think it's important for us all to know what awaits us. It's certainly important. It's important to understand, or that before learning it by heart or by circumstance, to understand that no one can dance with a bear, and when hugged by a bear, the bear certainly doesn't love you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor, for your, well, I would say, chilling lecture. We have some time for questions and comments, so please raise your hand. Yes, please. That's fine.
My name is Arild Moe. Thank you very much for your presentation. You have a very interesting background yourself as a historian, former prime minister, and former leader of foreign intelligence service in Romania. I got from your presentation, you mentioned several factors. Not respecting the election rules and then also the views and attitudes of several candidates, most outspokenly with Diana Szajak, but also with, as far as I understood you, with Colin Georgescu. And then the foreign factor, the Russian, mentioned or not, the Russian influence. I missed one factor, and it would be very interesting to have a comment from you on that, and that is ordinary people's feeling of being a bit outside the society. I think that very many of those who have voted for Georgescu, or they are not on TikTok, but they got some sort of identification with the anti-system vote. And last, one of the very old Romanian politicians, who is very much a system politician, Victor Ponta, former prime minister. He is now in the second new election. He is a candidate, and he presents himself in a very Trump way with red caps, Romania first, and so on. And he also says, God will help us.
Will you
May I answer now?
respond?
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you very much, Professor. And it is for me an honor to meet you here, knowing very much your large knowledge about Romania and the fact that you wrote about Romania. So therefore, your questions are by far very, very significant. And thank you very much again for your entire academic career. It's an honor for me to have you here. There is certainly a deep lack of trust that's manifested in large swaths of the Romanian society, lack of trust addressing democratic institutions per se. It doesn't happen since yesterday. It's something that's been, in a way, nurtured in the past 2 decades, maybe, when all sorts of polls showed that high up on the scale of institutional trust were institutions that would have uniformed personnel, just like the army or the intelligence services, maybe the national police, the church itself. Whereas the parliament, political parties, were very down that scale, maybe down to the bottom of the scale. The truth is that the traditional political party, who have been in the past years united, quote unquote, in a sort of a large coalition, namely the liberals and the national liberals and the social democrats, so center right and center left, did not perform well, administratively speaking. But the large, well, I would say almost a third of the public, including large parts of the Romanian diaspora, which is the largest diaspora, national diaspora in the European Union, felt the same, that they're unprivileged, that their opinion cannot be taken into account by any of the traditional parties, that there are no answers in what concerns the living, bettering their living, coming from the ruling parties, and therefore, in quite a large number, those who voted for Georgescu, with or without access on TikTok, were voting. The vote was actually a vote of protest against the actual political establishment. Learning from this situation is a difficult thing. And I doubt the traditional party of Romania will internalize this experience very soon, because the way they've been petrified their own inner structures in the past years leaves no room for flexibility and political creativity. As for Mr. Ponta, who was indeed the Prime Minister of Romania, he's trying to steal votes from whatever has been left of this sovereignist, Eurosceptic, NATO-skeptic camp, now bereaved of any presence of Mrs. Șoșoacă or Mr. Georgescu. So he tries to instill himself in this camp, changing his rhetorics into, you graciously said, the pro-Trump rhetorics, I would say, is not Trump at all. He's very much himself. He's a maverick. And he tries to steal votes for as much as he can. It's difficult, because there are too many runners on quite a small patch of political addressees. So, but he tries, and he presents himself as a better political individual in comparison with what was he some 10 years ago. Well,
Okay.
after acting a consultant to the president of Serbia and to Mr. Erdogan, you may understand his mindset.
We have two questions down there. We can take them. One of the back there, and yes, there, and then the other one behind you.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Håkon Blankenborg, former diplomat, and etc., etc. There are many aspects of which we could follow up from your introduction. One of them is that Romania, as many other countries, have, for the time being, a very strong far-right anti-establishment movement. And referring to an interview with Mr. Simon in Financial Times yesterday, where he tried to explain exactly what is his position, he was not exactly a pro-EU, but somehow pro-EU and pro-NATO, provided that the US is in and so on. What more interesting is maybe that he underlined his alliance with Meloni and the Peace Party in Poland, which should say something about the relations with Russia. So, could you try to explain where do you think the far right is for the time being in this more geopolitical context, the far right in Romania? Are they moving in the pragmatic way, or are they moving in the, should we say, more pro-Russian way?
I'll take the other question now. There too.
And then I'll answer.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
take two too, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
Nikolai.
because I want to. My name is Radu Karp. I'm also from Romania, from University of Bucharest, also for the Center of Russian Studies. And I want to just to add something in order to understand the situation in Romania. This was a warning. I mean, what happened in Romania could happen everywhere in Europe, could happen everywhere where there is a democracy. This was a warning, and we saw the signs of that warning previously in the elections of Republic of Moldova, as Professor Ungureanu already said, but also in the elections in the Länder in Germany. And I'm sure that we will see the same path in Poland, because they will have the next elections. And after Poland, in the next democracy. Therefore, we have to find the most accurate explanation of what happened. And I have to say, I have to add something, that it's terrifying for us. We don't know the whole story. We don't know who was behind to pay the whole operation. I mean, in the report, in the French report of Virginium that was addressed by Mr. Ungureanu, there is a key phrase. There was a lot of money involved, but we don't know, they don't know who paid, apparently. They used crypto that is difficult to trace. We arrived with the investigation in South Africa, but the investigation stopped there. It could be everywhere. The websites of the Electoral Authority were attacked from 36 countries, different countries in the same time, in the same day, by Russian Federation agents. It was, of course, from inside Russian Federation, but from different countries. As we have seen in 2014 with another experiment in the Ukrainian elections, but they were successful because at that time Ukraine didn't have the methods to counterattack this kind of cyber warfare, a very intense cyber warfare that could happen in any election. At that time, Russians succeeded to announce that the far-right candidate won instead of Poroshenko, because it was immediately, the elections organized after, immediately after Crimea incident. But now they were not successful in this cyber warfare. But on the other hand, they were successful in the sense that TikTok was the perfect weapon. And why TikTok? Because Romania has, and I have to add this kind of information, 9 million accounts of TikTok. This is number one in Europe. Hopefully in Norway you don't have this number of accounts. Hopefully. And you have to discourage people to have TikTok. Why? Because TikTok, Professor Ungureanu was very polite and he said it's a Chinese thing. I would add more. It's controlled by Beijing. Because Beijing has what they call the golden share. So no one can do anything without Beijing.
Okay, I think we have to.
So sorry for this, but I had to give you more information about what has been done. It's a very complex issue, but here we are for the questions and for comments. Thank you.
Would
Can-
you
can I answer?
address maybe the
Yeah.
question from
Yeah.
Mr. Blankenberg?
Yeah, first about the far right movement in Romania. And then I will go into the last interview given by Mr. Simeon to the international media. Far right movements surged very soon after January 1990. So they basically try to reconnect themselves, different generations, maybe more of them too young, to the Iron God symbolistic and political history from the interwar period, pretending to revive the spirit of the head of the Iron God, Codreanu, pretending to rejuvenate its ideals, etc., etc., promoting the idea that a lot of the former members of the movement were martyred by the communist regime because they were full anti-communists, etc. And that was in the early 90s against the background of a sheer absence of legal texts that could refer to extreme nationalism and far right or far left movements. Their manifestations, might they be celebrations or discourses aired in the open space or marches through the most important cities of Romania, attracted attention but not too many followers. And they were an object of negligence. This is the reason why in the past years their number increased and their presence in the public eye became quite stingy. And at a certain point, some years ago, prior to the pandemics were like an amplifying box to everything that went in this so-called fringe margins of the political spectrum. So prior to the pandemics, these movements, these groupings, got a similar language with the ultra-Orthodox groupings that belong or pretend to belong to the Romanian Orthodox Church, although they're not recognized as parts of the church by the synod itself. There again, because the national church, the National Orthodox Church of Romania is divided between, let's say, liberal archbishoprics and less liberal, up to very pro-Putinist archbishoprics. Not to the verge of sedition or sequencing between its arms, but allowing the meetings of the synod to be quite noisy and very tensioned. The ultra-Orthodox groups, there are pro-Putin, they show admiration for Putin, they are positively sanctioned by parts of the society. They joined hands with this far-right movements you quoted. Now, what's been left out in the margins of the society, plus those two ingredients I described to you, they acquire very much for the majority of the members of this alliance for the unity of Romanians that it led by Mr. Simion, which was fueled by what happened throughout the pandemics and different other events organized before or after the lockdowns. Now, Mr. Simion came out in the last 4 years as a sort of an apostle, the violent apostle of sovereignty, yeah? The leading voice of anti-EU or skeptical about EU, anti-NATO, pro-peace, pro-Russian orientation in the Romanian politics. He wasn't as violent in his speeches as Mr. Georgescu was clear about it. And the anti-Semitism and xenophobia of Mr. Georgescu's speeches is blatant. Whereas Mr. Simion tried to ride the waves in a way he will not get too wet at the end of it. And now he's becoming more and more, the French would call it assaisonné. He's closer to the mainstream behavior of the Romanian political class. He tries to negotiate. He's a sort of I would say, a sort of a Nigel Farage baptized a second time. Yeah, and he sees a lot of advantages. Well, trying to ride on two horses at least. His own party and the ultra criticized behavior of the traditional parties. But this is very much because he has an interest, a political interest, an electoral interest into what would happen some weeks from now. That is the first round of the newly organized presidential elections. I would not, look, when the wolf howls pretending to be a sheep, I would not take this for granted. I have, and it's not just me as an individual, I have my own reserve when taking this aboard as a innocent and absolute change of behavior or of political maturity.
Thank you. We have one last question here, and that is, we'll have to draw the line now. You first, and yeah.
Thank you.
And then
Thank you so much for the speech, Mr. Ungureanu.
Perfect.
Thank you. My name is Sama Mosni, and I am a student at the University of Oslo. My question was whether or not you think that the Chinese ownership of TikTok, what that had to do with the interference of the Romanian election. Are they perhaps supporting Russian cyber propaganda? Or are they too passive and in that way supporting their ally? Or is the fact that they deleted many thousand fake accounts and followers a sign that they aren't using Chinese political motives in how they run TikTok?
Thank you for the question.
Is your question along the same lines?
Let me, if I just a brief answer to this question here, and then I'll take yours. Thank you. Do you drive? Do you have a driver license? Not yet. Okay, but you know people with a driver license. And you know people who, besides their driver license, they own cars. Yeah? They have their own car. Some of them, at least. One of them. Tell me that there is one of your friends that has a car. Okay. And drives it. A car is a mean for locomotion. Okay? It takes us from A to B at a certain speed. We have to abide to rules when driving it. There are licensed drivers who would speed their cars against groups of people, hoping to kill them down. Yeah? In that moment, the car, which is a non-critical tool that we use to reach point B from A, becomes a weapon. The same goes for social platforms. It's the same logic behind it. A social platform is not a weapon, but can be weaponized. depending on who is manning the buttons at the engines, the very engines of that social platform. I care less about who owns TikTok as a company, although there were members of the administration council that were summoned to the European Parliament and had to deliver answers. What has been done with TikTok, etc., etc. But TikTok is a company, and whoever uses the platform, leaving aside the administration council, whoever uses the platform to pursue criminal projects of the one that we discussed, of the kind that we discussed this morning, is a different thing. No one, for example, the car that smashed in Magdeburg, if I'm not mistaken, some weeks ago, into a group of people, was a Mercedes. It's not the chairman, the CEO of Mercedes who's in charge with it. It's the driver. The same thing, the same philosophy applies to this. It's not the administration council of TikTok who's in charge with this, but those who know how to manipulate algorithms, how to multiply fake accounts, etc., etc., etc. On the other hand, it is indeed true that the very central, the core of the TikTok company, which is in China, did not address this kind of problems before, and had to comply and had to understand that they had to comply with regulations, the existing regulations throughout the European Union. And there is something else. There is but a very few number of European countries, member of EU, which are prepared to counter-attack this evil usage of the social platform. So it's not about the ownership, it's about how that tool has been used by different other entities, certainly not by the administration council. That would entail a commercial risk. Is not the case.
One last short question.
Thank you very much. My name is Susanne Sabo, and exactly 10 years ago, I was working as a foreign policy correspondent in Budapest. And you know that when it comes to Russian interference, it's actually quite vivid over there, and also in Germany. And my short question is, aren't we a little bit late when it comes to Russian interference actually via social media? Because back then we could already trace back to places like St. Petersburg. And the problem was already there, and now we are reaching a level when actually countries' elections can be rigged, quite literally. And Poland, Czech Republic, all other Eastern European countries facing similar threat. And at the end of the day, the existence of the European Union is a threat. Is there any strategy or any action plan is building up at a European level? Because maybe Romania should serve now as a wake-up call, a last wake-up call to the unity of the European Union?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Europe should have been awakened from its beauty sleep far before 2014. By the time when Estonia was cut off from any connection, any internet connection, the government and other private institutions would have had, and that was in 2008. The Russians then showed that with their troll institute in St. Petersburg, they could switch off, practically unplug a European country from the internet with capital I. And Estonia was for 72 hours in a complete disarray, on the fringe of civil war, properly. And then the Prime Minister at the time, the Estonian Prime Minister at the time, became European Commissioner addressing issues of the kind. And his voice, unfortunately, was just like St. John the Baptist's voice. It was heard, quote unquote, in the desert. Nobody paid attention to him. And then came late 2008, the summit, the NATO summit in Bucharest, and then 2014, Georgia, then 2014 Crimea, and so on and so forth. The Russian activity on social platform or in internet, using internet tools in general, is not something new. It went into, let's say, the second stage of a real and tangible activity. Now, it might have been experimental, some, I don't know, 5 years ago. Now it's offensive. If this caught us on the wrong step, I'll be very frank to you. I think, yes, it caught us on a wrong step. It caught us somehow unprepared. Or if you want, in Brussels, at the level of the European Commission and the European Council, everybody was psychologically prepared. Nobody was ready to undertake the real steps toward counterattacking such situations, because they need a lot of common work. They need, indeed, they feed themselves, indeed, from the very value of unity the European Union tries to offer its members. But I hope it's not too late. It's one against the many, and I would put my trust into the many.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think this has been a wake-up call for many of us here. And certainly we will also all be following the upcoming elections in Romania with even more interest and more knowledge than we previously had. So I think I will just thank you on behalf of the Fridtjof Nansen Institute for our cooperation and for this lecture specifically, and thank all of you for participating and coming here to this session. And thank to Camilla Brune, who is an excellent organizer for such seminars. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.